Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the June 2023 Wilderness Medicine Journal Club by VTC. This month's session is on animal attacks is the formal title, but I've been told that is somewhat controversial, but I just named it after the FOM credit for animal attacks. We can call it animal misadventures or animal encounters. I just wanted to get a couple things out of the way real quick. This is the last of the current 6-month series, meaning FOM credit certificates should be distributed. I'll get them started soon. Give me a little time. My goal is sometime in July for them to be all handed out. I'll be using the emails you all use in your registration and in your, I'll correlate that with the Zoom participation. So that it's pretty straightforward. The minimum attendance requirement is 60 minutes for a FOM credit. I give a decent amount of leeway, but it should be a decent amount of attendance to get a point because they're free. Other stuff. So this month in particular, the 3 presenters graciously accepted to present with like a 3-day or 2.5-day notice because I've persistently had to ask a few times to get volunteers. So if you're interested at all in presenting, please reach out to me like as soon as I send out each month's email with the articles, because it does get a little stressful on my end to have to send out Basecamp messages and email requests for presenters every month. It's been pretty persistent lately, and I know it's the summer now, which is always kind of a dry period. And I know it's all your volunteer time, it's my volunteer time. I don't get paid for this or any reimbursement at all. But this series is for and by students and residents, and the only way it can work is if students and residents of, students of any kind. I've had paramedic students, EMS students, nursing students present, but it won't work if we don't have people stand up and help me in the volunteer process. So please volunteer to present like these 3 have done, and then we will be happy to keep this going. I have the 6-month series from July through December planned out. The schedule is on the website. Next month will be backpacking, and that should be pretty cool because we've got a couple people from our group have done the complete through hike of the AT and the PCT as well. So we're going to have them kind of help us out how to plan it, how to orient it, how to do your drop-offs, what to bring, what to pack, how to plan, how to prepare. But anyway, that's future stuff. Anybody that wants to join in after the presentations to talk more about WMS involvement, how to be more involved as a student, as a resident, how to be involved at like a local level with your community, with your hospital, just let me know. We can kind of have a little brainstorming period at the end. We do these every once in a while, but otherwise I'm going to stop blabbing and I'll hand things over to Sarah, who's our first presenter, and go ahead and share your screen and I will mute myself.
And I actually don't necessarily need to share my screen unless I'm just sharing the article.
You are right. I am just so used to saying it.
I know what I usually do. I love putting together slides. Like putting together PowerPoints is fun for me. So I read the cougar attack article, and so this was interesting to me. So there's 2 big cats in the United States, one being the jaguar and one being the cougar. And it's not common to necessarily have there aren't a lot of cougar attacks, but when they happen, they can be quite terrifying and quite devastating. And so what these people did, as where we live overlaps with their habitat, and they do have a very wide-ranging habitat. The study authors decided to perform a retrospective analysis of cougar attacks on humans in the United States. And now they can range like as far south as Argentina. I mean, they have a very wide range. So they contacted 16 states that cougars were known to inhabit in the US by email and by phone. They contacted the state Fish and Wildlife Department officials and asked them to identify all verified cougar attacks in recorded state history. And then they looked at variables amongst the victims, including age, sex, when the attack happened, if the attack occurred in a suburban or urban area, the activity the victim was involved in at the time of the attack, if they were alone, what anatomic site was injured, and if the victim had to be hospitalized, and if the attack was fatal. And then they were looking for like a narrative description of each attack. And then they also looked at variables for the cougars, including their age and their sex, and if they were killed or euthanized as a result of the attack. And they defined an attack as any aggressive behavior by a cougar toward a human that resulted in contact between the cougar and the human. And then they would describe an aggressive behavior by the cougar that did not result in physical contact as a near attack. A residential attack was defined as one that occurred within a subdivision or a space immediately adjacent to human dwellings. And then they coded the anatomic sites of the injuries. And so of the 16 states they contacted, they got 10 responses. And of the 74 attacks that there have been from 1924 to 2018, 20 of those were in Colorado, 20 in Washington. California had 15, New Mexico had 6, Montana 3, Nevada 3, Utah 3, Idaho 2, and Oregon had 1, Wyoming had 1. And those were the ones who provided data for review. The age of the patients was about 22 years old, give or take 18 years. And 51% of the victims were male. Almost half the victims were less than 18 years old, and over a third of the victims were less than 10 years old. And there was only one attack on someone who was older than 65. The attacks were more common in the summer and fall months. The attacks occurred during daylight hours, and only 2 of the 17 attacks for when they recorded the actual time of the attack was before 10 a.m. or after 10 p.m. And 10 of the attacks occurred in residential areas. The victims were mostly, over a third of them were hiking. Some of them were just working in their yards. 16% of them were hunting, 9% were jogging. Attacks also occurred while they were playing by a stream or river, or walking with like a dog or other domestic animal, mountain biking, camping, or snowshoeing. And about half of the victims were alone when they were attacked. 100% of the joggers and over half of the people in like a residential area, and about 38% of the hikers were alone at the time of the attack. The most common sites of injury, as expected with a cougar, were the head and neck area, and then also the chest. Those were the most common sites of injury. No association between site of injury and age. Of the 74 attacks, 5 were classified as near attacks. And of the 35 victims with available data for it, 46% were hospitalized after being attacked, and 15% of those were fatal. 7 of the deaths were in people who were 18 years of age or older. And so that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 4 of them were younger, less than 18, which is terrifying if you're out there hiking, with your 8-year-old child, that they could be possibly attacked and killed by a cougar in the middle of the day. Every year there's 500,000 non-human bite wounds in the United States, with 0.03% of these bites result in death. And though, so cougar attacks make up only a very small percentage of these bites, but fatal attacks are very rare. I think it's still important to be aware of your surroundings and aware of sightings, and aware that it is possible. So they don't just attack livestock and other animals. They are open to attacking people. So children and young adults make up most of the attack victims in the US. They noted that there were consistent attack patterns in Canada, and which makes sense. Like, it's a smaller target. It makes sense that a large cat would go after a smaller target. But in conclusion, it's not common, but it can be fatal. They go after children and young adults. All age groups are at risk, and most attacks occur during the daytime, summer and fall, and often occur when people are recreating in wilderness or suburban settings, and often by themselves. So if we want to try to prevent this, maybe we go in larger groups, and maybe wear like a backpack that will protect your head and neck from an attack from behind. But as development and increasing wilderness activities put people in closer contact with cougars, we're probably going to see more of this, and it's important to for public health to just convey the messaging that this is possible. And that's what I have from that article. That's what I took from that article.
Has anybody encountered a cougar in the wild or seen traces of one?
I have. I
Okay.
lived in Colorado for 10 years right after college in the 95 to 2004. And I had two encounters. Well, one was there was the Rocky Mountain Ark, and she actually had two rescue cougars there. So you could see it every day. I actually house sat for her while she went on a 6-month world tour. So I saw one every day for 6 months, or saw two of them every day for 6 months. But another one, someone had dropped off roadkill, and I wasn't strong enough to drag the roadkill into their enclosure. And then while I was doing other duties around the wildlife rescue facilities that she has, a cougar came up, and like I watched him drag it off and just drag it down the hillside. And another time was on a hike, but I think it was as surprised as me. And it looked at me and I looked at it, and I was like, "Go away!" And it turned around and it ran.
Yeah, so far I've been lucky not to encounter one, but I'm sure everybody remembers the case. I think it was in California with sometime within the past 5-10 years. The I think it was a young adult man was mountain biking or hiking in California, and he like wrestled the, I think it was somewhat juvenile cougar, and I think he killed it.
He did end up killing it, but it was between both of them, it was a fight for their lives.
Yeah, so it's more. I mean, once I start thinking about certain topics, like each month, I tend to somehow, I don't understand. Maybe my computer's listening for me, but I can't tend to see articles about it or news bulletins about it, or just like be more aware of it. But there was another article I read about like this little 2-year-old who was kind of picked up and carried off, but her dad stopped her from getting into the woods, and um, it's definitely happening. There's that one lady, I think she was killed by the mountain lion. It was like bit her in the skull. Um, so it's definitely something to be more aware of, and those of us who live northwest, west, but in, I guess, technically Florida.
And there was one, the Belgian Malinois,
hmm
because I wrote a breaking news article about it. The Belgian Malinois saved its owner
hmm
from a cougar attack, and ended up or no, made that yeah, it saved its owner from a mountain lion attack, and ended up the Belgian Malinois did end up dying, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know there was sightings of them coming back into Iowa. There's reports of them coming back into like northern Michigan. So they're I wouldn't say they're making a comeback, because we definitely have wiped out most of our large predatory animals in our country, but they're there, and if you see them, they've already seen you. You will not sneak up on one. Probably you might sneak up on a bear, but you're not going to sneak up on a cougar. Um Any questions about cougar attacks or encounters or any other stories anybody wants to mention?
Yeah, I've been in Oregon and Montana for my whole life, and I've ran into cougars a couple times. But I read an article where they played either crickets or NPR next to cougar kills, and like had like the like motion sensing cameras come by and see like how often the cougars would return. And or the frog sounds or whatever didn't scare him off, but NPR did. So now every time I go trail run by myself, I'll like play podcasts out loud, try and scare him off with NPR.
Yeah, I went hiking with my dog today and I played podcasts. Mine were kind of nerdy. I was listening about how caterpillars become butterflies and that crazy metamorphosis process. And maybe I taught some bears a couple things. Gotta have some noise with you. There it seems to be, as far as cougars are concerned, like Sarah was saying, like having some protective, honestly, a backpack, you'll have it if you're backpacking or extended hiking. And that can, if you have straps or something on your neck, because cats will go for the head and the neck, bears will just kind of go for your trunk, as far as I've seen. But something to be on your back, and that's the same thing as we'll learn soon about how to protect yourself from bears. But I don't want to belabor the point too much about bears because we're going to learn about that soon. So the next two articles we have are covering wolves and bears. Does one of our next presenters have a preference on who goes first?
I have no preference. I'm happy to go.
Oh, you spoke up. Why don't you take it away?
All right. Let's see. I do have slides. Let me see if I can get it to share my screen.
I believe I have share screen enabled.
You do.
Yes.
There we go.
That's
That's not there. That's my bear. That's my pup Ember. She's snoozing on the couch. So if you hear snoring, that's probably her. So I'm Josh. I'm a resident in Las Vegas, where we don't see bears quite so often. But I've spent plenty of time in the Sierras, seen plenty of bears. So this article was written, it's a little older. It was written in 1999. I think there's a little bit of stuff that's changed, but not too much. Interestingly, it was written by an orthopedist out of Johns Hopkins. So let's get started. So they had a pretty good summary. The abstract was, I feel like, summed up the paper pretty well. Bear attacks are rare. Brown bear attacks, they don't happen very often. Really, bear attacks in general don't happen very often. But brown bear attacks, they said severe and sudden were the words they used. Black bear attacks, more minor. We're all terrified of polar bears, and luckily, most of us don't live in Alaska very often. Or unluckily, because it's a beautiful place. But I guess polar bears aren't really to be feared as much as we think, unless you're walking around in the dark carrying a pot of meat, which we can get to later. And then the article only briefly touched on bear spray. I think that's one of the big things that's changed, but bear spray works pretty well. We'll get to that in a bit. So bears, there are three types that the article talks about. The Ursuses, I don't know what the plural is. Black bears, brown bears, and polar bears. Brown bears often called grizzlies. Those are our three types. They're pretty adorable. They do look like they want to be pet and cuddled. Probably not a good idea, though. Apparently it's not as bad as scary as I would think. We'll get to that later as well. So you always hear about you do different things depending on what type of bear it is. So how do we tell them apart? The best way apparently is to look at their claws and measure them. Can't say I've ever been tempted to walk up to a bear and look at its claws. That seems like a surefire way to not have a good outcome. They look a little bit different. We call them black bears and brown bears. It's really kind of a misnomer. They can be, depending on the specific bear and the season and all kinds of other stuff, the variety of colors can range amazingly, and you really can't tell by the color. they've got that hump and a little bit different of a shape, oftentimes maybe a little different of a size. I don't know. This is something I've always wondered about. And we'll get to kind of what to do if a bear does attack. And there's different things depending on the type of bear. But one of the things the article mentions is as a bear is charging at you at 40 kilometers an hour, are you really going to be able to tell what kind of bear it is? But then they kind of drop it and just say, yeah, you should tell what kind of bear it is, which seems a little bit unrealistic to me. So of the three types, which should I be scared of? Well, none of them, maybe all of them. I don't know. Black bears, they tend to eat vegetation. All of them will eat meat. All three types of bears. Black bears mostly eat vegetation. If there's meat around, they will eat it. They tend to be pretty timid. And the article specifically, I thought it was interesting. We all are hear from a young age about mother bears attacking when their cubs are threatened or when they're separated from their cubs. Apparently, there have been, at least as of 1999, no fatalities from mother black bears defending their cubs. So the grizzly bears will eat meat more often, but are still the main part of their diet is eating plants. They do tend to attack pretty frequently if it's a mother bear with cubs that feels threatened. That's where the majority of brown bear attacks come from. And they'll attack you enough to decide that you're not a threat, and then apparently leave you alone when they've decided that enough damage has been done. They will get predatory for food. So if they've killed something, they'll come back potentially multiple days in a row, and keep eating it. And if you've gone to their carcass, or they think you're trying to steal their carcass to bring it home and have a nice barbecue or something, they'll be not so happy about that. And then polar bears, because they have no real threats other than each other and us, they're not really scared or confrontational. They just kind of exist. They eat seals, and they really don't seem, according to the article, they don't bother us that much. So in North America, they have a lot of statistics in this article from a lot of different areas and different types of bears. Some of them are pretty fantastic. It talks about injuries from black and brown bears in Yosemite in the 70s was 2.7 per million, and in the 80s and 90s was 0.5 per million, which is kind of a spectacularly low number. Now, of course, that's Yellowstone, where a lot of people drive in their cars through, look at the pretty sights, and then keep on driving. And that does increase. They talked about in Yosemite, it's 1 in 59,000, where you do get people a little more close contact with the bears. So of course, people who are near bears are the ones who get hurt from bears and get attacked by bears and get to see bears, which is kind of cool. So hikers and photographers, they talk about photographers getting way too close and finding post-attack pictures of very close-up bear pictures, which is unsurprisingly a bad idea. Most of the time, bears don't like us. They try to avoid us. It's when we scare them, sneak up on them on purpose or accidentally, or we're in their food area. I thought this table was kind of cool, that lightning over here, which, I'm scared of, but probably equally scared of to bears, is almost 400 times more likely to kill me than bears. There's 1 death in North America per year at the time of writing this, though in 1999 they did say that things were increasing. But that's still a pretty impressively low rate. So yeah, sneaking up on bears, probably not a great idea. Trying to steal their food, probably not a great idea. That being said, I've been to Alaska, seen them at spawning streams, and we were not all that far away, a safe enough distance, but they could not have cared less about us, because they would walk into the stream, pick up the plumpest looking salmon, take a bite, drop it, and go on to the next salmon, because there was just thousands of salmons in the river. So I don't know how much they cared about us at that point. On the flip side, when I've been in Yellowstone backpacking. I've had bears go walk right through my campsite, 20 minutes after I left to come sniff around and see what I'd been doing there. So we all potentially like going into nature and are going to be in an area where there are bears. So how do we prevent it? One of the big things, they, especially as bears become more comfortable around humans, it becomes an issue. They equate humans with food, and so we have to teach them that we are not food and that we do not have food for them. The article goes as far as saying that you should cook a mile from camp. That seems potentially unrealistic. I often will finish a day of backpacking and want to sit down and make camp and cook dinner and then go straight to bed because it's dark and getting late, and don't want to walk for another half hour to and then set up camp. But I think the idea is a good one. Camping, cooking far, at least a ways from your camp, setting up so that the wind isn't blowing the smell of your food right through your camp, being relatively cleanly with your food, and then storing your food well. Depending on where you are, sometimes hanging is a reasonable option. The picture down here is of the PCT hang. There's a number of different options, but this one has become one of the more popular ones, but does need a pretty high branch. There's also things like counterbalancing, which, depending on how tall you are and how long your hiking poles are, may or may not actually work. And then there's the bear cans, which are heavy and bulky and awkward, but also make for great seats and drums and washing machines, and are fairly multi-purpose. So, potentially, depending on where you're backpacking, not a bad thing to bring. It's a lot more convenient than trying to throw a rock 50 feet in the air every single night. They talk about how infrequent hiking in groups are, which is great if you can find 4 people to go hiking with, and will probably prevent a bear attack. But otherwise, similar to cougars, making noise can help. They said bear bells are plus minus, whether it actually helps or not. They did mention that sexual odors and menstrual odors have not been found to be an issue. And then they said to unzip your sleeping bag while you're sleeping, which I'd never heard before. I guess if you're really worried about a bear dragging you out of your tent in the middle of the night, you could escape from your sleeping bag and survive that way. I feel like I don't know. That one surprised me. I hadn't heard that before. So you're about to get attacked. What do? Bear spray. If you're going somewhere with bears and you're concerned about bears, bring bear spray. It works. The article was kind of hit and miss on whether bear spray works, but more modern studies that I've seen, bear spray does work. There's a caveat. You need to be able to have the bear spray available. So if the bear spray is buried at the bottom of your pack, that doesn't help you. That's why they have this handy dandy holster so that you can pull out the bear spray immediately. Bear spray does get old, does need to be replaced because the propellant won't be as good and there won't be as much propellant. So do keep an eye on that. I think I've read something that said every 4 or 5 years. Try to avoid leaving it in super hot or super cold places, but it should still work. If a bear is about to attack you, you generally want to look big, make noise. It did say to leave your backpack on because that can protect you, but hold something up. Don't be bending down to pick stuff up. Kind of similar to cougars. Do you want to run away? Probably not. That often triggers bears to think this is a fun game of tag and try to catch you. They did mention dropping a toy for the bear, like your camera, that the bear might investigate, which I thought was kind of amusing, but maybe it would work. And then a lot of people, you hear about bringing guns in the backcountry and trying to shoot a bear. It may work, probably more likely because you'll scare the bear. Bears are pretty big, pretty thick skin, pretty thick skulls. You have to be a pretty good shot to hit just the right spot to kill a bear and carry a pretty large caliber gun. So I think you're better off carrying bear spray, which also then won't kill the bear. But a gun may or may not work. But a loud noise may scare them off. So I found this more recent article, 2010, talking about bear spray in Alaska. And they had some stats here. 92% of the time, Brown bears 90% of the time, black bears and 100% of the time, polar bears would stop their undesirable behavior. 98% of people carrying bear spray were uninjured in close range encounters. That's pretty good. That works pretty darn well. Those are, for a bear coming and charging me, that's odds that I like pretty well. All right. So the bear did decide to attack me. I forgot my bear spray at home. What am I going to do? For a black bear, they said fight back. If it does actually start attacking you, it's going to keep attacking you. And so because it's feeling threatened, and so you want to fight back however you can with whatever weapons you can. Now, of course, this comes back to relying on figuring out what kind of bear it is. So if I'm being attacked by a bear and I don't know what kind of bear it is, honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do. And the article didn't really say, like, here's what you do if you don't know. So that would be something I'd be curious on everyone's thoughts. For brown bears, most of the time they're bluffing. They're going to run at you, make loud noises, stand up and be scary. If they do start attacking, you just want to stay still. They want to neutralize you, so you lie down, which seems hard while a bear is standing on top of you. But you want to stay still and then staying still for a few minutes after they leave, so they don't come back. This quote I thought was funny. Brown bears have been observed to hold down their victims with one foreleg while eviscerating them with the other foreleg, in the same paragraph where it says just stay still, it'll be fine. And then it didn't really say what to do if a polar bear attacks you, so I'm assuming they don't attack very often, but it's probably bad news if they do. After the attack, kind of your standard trauma march ABCs, whichever one you can remember after having just been attacked by a bear. Tourniquets will help. If it's in a hospital, tetanus and antibiotic prophylaxis is probably a good idea. They said penicillins, I think, were a good one of choice. And then to close up, there were two quotes that I particularly liked from the article. This first one: 2 victims of polar bear inflicted human injuries were tourists who petted polar bears. In both instances, the bears took the tourists' hand in their mouths, but then released them. Although neither bear bit down, their teeth produced minor abrasions that did not require suture repair. Yeah. And then the second one, I think it was a facetious statement, but the characteristic most useful in distinguishing black bear scat from brown bear scat is the presence of bear bells in the latter. My wife's family gave us bear bells when we started dating and called them dinner bells. I thought they were very funny. So anyway, I think that's all I've got on bear attacks. Love to get all of your thoughts on bears and bear bells and bear attacks and all that.
As I've only encountered up close black bears personally. I have not seen any polar bears other than in a zoo, but I've seen brown bears. I don't want to specifically say grizzlies from a distance. Has anybody encountered other than black bears up close?
I've been near a brown bear while they're fishing in a stream in Alaska, but especially like what Josh said during salmon season, they really don't care about you. Like it was a little scary for me, and I thought we should keep our distance as much as we could, and we did, but they didn't seem too preoccupied with us.
Yeah, the ones I've had with black bears are, that everybody has like after reading this article and a couple others, misconception that any mama bear with a cub is automatically like out to get you or is going to come after you to like best defense is a good offense type approach. But I was hiking the same trail today as I've hiked before where I found a bear, literally was a foot off the trail in the brush with a tiny little cub like the size of a raccoon. And they just kind of jumped out of surprise, just like we did, and then ran away. And then the same thing happened literally the next month in the Smoky Mountain National Park last year. This cub was like the size of a cat. Like this one was tiny. And then I've solo hiked and seen a bear on a trail. Never once felt like the bear was actually going to come after me. But based on the article here, it said like the attacks from a black bear are essentially either habituated due to feeding black bears, or bears actually predatory coming after you, which is a little terrifying. There was a story recently. It was really close to one of the hospitals I work at here in Virginia. There's a couple hiking on the Appalachian Trail, specifically not following the notice of, hey, there's a bear in the area. All the local shelters are shut. Don't camp in this 5-mile radius. Specifically violated that. Sleeping in a tent. They used a bear hang, not a can, hang. They cooked in their tent, in their campsite. They hung the bear hang. It was within 200 feet of their camp. And they had all the little wrappers of granola bars and, like camp food in their pockets, in their tent, inside of their like sleeping bag. So they had made quite a few mistakes. And 2 relatively large bears, I think the ranger said it was the largest bear they've seen in years, raided their tent at night. They had to run out. The only lamps they had was like one faulty headlamp and one dying phone battery lamp. And they came back to the next day and found everything, including shoes, backpacks, tents, absolutely shredded. So I would take the notices seriously if you're through hiking or camping or anything, and follow the rules of the recommendations for camp etiquette with food. There's actually a lot of debate now between, like he was saying, bear cans and bear hangs. The cans are cumbersome. They're not heavy. They're like a big empty plastic can, but they're big and cumbersome. But then you don't have to wander off, risk poison ivy, and just like go into the brush and do a bear hang. So there's some actual debate that everybody should be using bear cans. It's just a lot of resistance to the thru hikers, because so many thru hikers are all about absolute minimum weight they can carry and minimum bulk. So does it work better? Is it safer? Maybe. But are you going to get people to use it? Probably not. It's just hard to convince thru hikers. It's also really hard to study thru hikers. One of our faculty here at VTC has had this ongoing attempt to do a longitudinal study of Appalachian Trail hikers, but the response rate and the follow-up rate for these hikers is next to nothing. So it's kind of hard to study these things and what people use, because nobody responds. So any other encounter? Oh, I see 2 have popped up in the chat. Oh, Bear Cub got hit by a car. Yeah, I've never encountered polar bear, but I know a PA who was doing some locums work in Alaska, and it was such a small facility where she had to draw the blood. She had to transport the blood in the vials to the airport plane to be flown to a lab, and that she would like hear wolves howling and see polar bears off in the distance. So it's a different world. If you do locums, you can see some cool stuff. Everybody wants to see a polar bear. And then there was recently, did you hear about there was a man killed in Arizona by a brown bear? I think it was brown bear. I'll just say bear. Literally within the past month. And Josh, you said you're in Las Vegas, right? So that must have been somewhat talked about.
I don't remember hearing about that at all.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, when I read through all these articles, like I swear it's just like my phone recognizes what I've been looking for. But yeah, that's not too long ago. Like somebody got killed in Arizona by one. But honestly, most animal encounters are because we're in their territory, we're doing something wrong. So just remember that too. If you're with people, you're making noise, you're doing bear hangs, you're doing leave no trace, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I feel like some of the like opposite of, what is the opposite of good is perfect or something like that. Because the article starts talking about like you should have separate clothes for cooking in, and clothes in your bear can. Like you're not going to get a single backpacker to
No.
do that. And then they're going to, is that then going to prevent them from like, well, if I'm not doing that, then I shouldn't even bother doing anything.
Right.
So like, I feel like they're, no one's going to cook a mile away and then walk back to their camp. I went to a scout camp when I was young that had so you could cook right next to where you camped. They had lines put up that you could throw your bags over, which was super convenient, like pre-hung lines in a tree. But they were strict enough that they said this was back when film cameras were a thing, any film had to be put in a bear bag because apparently film is derived way down the line from beef, some part of a cow. And they were like, there's potential that it could smell. I was like, no bear has ever eaten a roll of film.
Yeah. Yeah, there needs to be. I've had somewhat of a beef with national park and national forest notices for a while because once you start learning about a topic, you pick up on little mistakes, and then the little mistakes you realize are not so little. Somewhat tangential, but I was visiting. It's way better now. I visited Grand Canyon with my wife in April. But I was there like 5 years before, and in Grand Canyon, they were mentioning only about heat stroke, heat exhaustion. They didn't say anything about exercise associated hyponatremia. So they were only talking about push fluids. And then they had a lot more deaths from hyponatremia. And they've actually got really good notices out there about between the differences, but they still have some problems between the difference of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So if the national parks still have trouble between those two things, I don't know how long it's going to take for places to get better at reasonable notices for animal safety. I don't know. All we can do is talk about it and teach each other, and hopefully that trickles down eventually. But yeah, any reasonable approach, even if it avoids the like minutia, is probably better than being such sticklers that people will be put off. And that's medicine in general, honestly. I think bears and statistically are not as likely to, you're more likely to like get in a car crash on the way to your hike, honestly, but it's a little scarier. So, and I don't know. I think it's a good topic. I've done a lot of hiking in my time, and I still get a little nervous if all of a sudden I smell like this thick, musty, deep, thick smell if I'm in a deep wooded area. And I never know if it's just a deer, an elk, or a moose or a bear. I'd probably be more scared of a moose, honestly. But making noise, having bear spray ready, and like he said, in a holster, practice it. Practice with a bear spray can. Don't just have it assuming you know how to use it. And the article he found was good. There's a lot of articles about it. The main reason we use bear spray rather than just human pepper spray is the cone of effect. It's a huge, widespread cone of the pepper spray. It's less concentrated, but it's a lot bigger spray because you got this bear charging at you, you're freaking out. It makes it less likely for you to miss. If you have a human can of pepper spray, way stronger. If you hit the bear in the face, more likely to cause it to deter, but you're much more likely to miss. So that's the thought between bear spray. And some more stuff that he was talking about, disposal, because it's an aerosolized can, you can't really fly with it well. When you go to an area, there's almost every town where there's bear concern has a Boy Scout or Scout team troop that will take these bear spray cans from you and use them in their service. So just look into that, because why throw it away? You spent probably $24. It's almost always $24, and you can't bring it home. So either practice with it or just donate it. And you also mentioned, Josh, the American view that guns are going to save them out in the field. So the bear's skull is both at an angle, and it's different between species, at a certain angle and thickness that even if you get a headshot, you might not take it down. So a caliber, I think I saw less than 0.45 or 45 caliber will not take a bear reliably down. Will it deter it? I don't know. Depends on what their intent is. But don't just have like a little 22 expecting to be okay. Or honestly, even like I've heard of fly fishermen out in Montana that carry like 50 caliber handguns because they loved playing Call of Duty back in the day. And it's got such a kickback that they're probably just going to miss anyway. So just prevention and avoidance is so much better in almost everything in wilderness medicine. But
Whenever I hear about bear attacks, I think about the scene in The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio when he endures all of those injuries, and we had some debates about what of that was actually survivable. But I just thought I would throw that out there, because if anyone hasn't seen The Revenant, it's a terrifying scene with the bears attacking him.
It did actually explain his point of not moving right away, because part of the reason the bear came back after him is because he moved pretty quickly, and the bear noticed and came back after him. So when he mentioned curl up in your ball, protect your head, protect your neck, protect your belly, and stay still. Granted, you've been mauled, bitten, scratched. It's gonna be, I can't imagine that situation, but moving quickly, like that feeling of relief. From what I've read, they actually come back more out to get you the second time. Any other thoughts? The only other bear story I have, again, I don't have much personal encounters because most of my experience, they just run off. Some of my nurses, unfortunately, because we're in Southwest Virginia, are into bear hunting. And which is, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be negative about it if this is your thing, but it seems a bit, one of them at least positive, I suppose, means of hunting, because they literally just have dogs tree the bears is terrified, hiding in a tree, and then you're just shooting a bear sitting on a limb of a tree. But that's what they do. But this guy must have been a pretty bad shot to miss a bear, but he like grazed the bear. It came at him, it bit him in the leg, and he had to go into the ER for rabies inoculation and antibiotics and delayed like closure. So we see more here of like the bear hunters. So it's just kind of weird, different populations see different things. Like so keep that in mind if you're a student or a resident, where your pocket of the country or the world is, you will have a unique training that somebody at your future shop will not have had. So anything you learn here today, anything you learn in wilderness medicine, or you're in your Vegas, you'll see probably more dehydration and heat stroke than most people, maybe a lot of envenomations that people won't see. North Carolina, here in Virginia with Julia or Sarah, you'll see a lot of the teas of snakes and stuff. You'll see a lot of the tank tops and the t-shirts and the testosterone kind of stuff. But
that's terrifying too. I don't know whether I'd rather encounter a bear or that.
So just keep that in mind. I've learned a lot by like talking to colleagues who train at different places. Anyway, so our last topic is something that I've luckily not had to encounter, a wolf case report. So Andrew, and if you're still, yeah, there you are, Andrew. Why don't you take it away? I'll stop blabbing.
Yeah, I'm here. Good evening, guys. Give me a second. Let me get this set up. Can you see the screen? Or say something if you can't. That's better. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. I know we're approaching 7, so if you have to go, I fully understand, and this is recorded, so that's great. But I was asked to cover this case report on wolves as part of this June edition of the Journal Club. Yeah, this segment is on everything about wolf attacks. Yeah, and just a refresher, my name's Andrew. I presented last May, a third year at Rosalind Franklin University, Chicago School of Medicine, where there's not many of these wild animals. However, I did do undergrad in Montana at Carroll College. I didn't encounter any cougars, I didn't encounter any bears, nor wolves. The only wild animal I've encountered was a moose that ran right in front of me when I was doing a marathon in Red Lodge. But that was it. Thankfully, I've not encountered a wolf. However, I've kind of put a smattering of resources together to try and make a presentation that kind of touches on both the case report, but then also touches on some of the methods to prevent it, as well as steps that we can take to kind of mitigate this from happening, and cover a conversation on rabies as well, since that's relevant to this case report. So first things first, or an overview of what I'm going to go through. So we're going to talk about wolf attacks. We're going to review the case report. It's called A Wild Wolf Attack and Its Unfortunate Outcome, Rabies and Death. Quite blunt title. And then a discussion about rabies, and then just time for questions if anyone has any. Okay. All right. So in North America, there's about 60,000 wolves. And there have only been 2 fatalities apparently caused by wolves. By comparison, by the way, domestic dogs in the US are responsible for 4.7 million bites, resulting in 500,000 to 800,000 hospital visits and about 15 to 20 fatalities per year. So an increase in instances of animal attacks on pets and humans suggests humans are encroaching on wild animals' habitats. This increase may also, to some extent, be associated with the unbalanced and uncontrolled breeding of animals that have been made the subjects of hunting bans. So research shows 3 underlying reasons for wolf attacks, basically. The wolf may be rabid, it may regard human beings as prey, or third, the attack may have been provoked by a human. And so this is something I garnered from, and I draw your attention to the table here. So this is something I got from a report, a 2002 to 2020 report by John D.C. Linnell of the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research. This was part of, and there's going to be a link to it later on, I'll tell you about. But basically, drawing your attention to the table, so researchers unearthed 489 victims of wolf attacks across the world from 2002 until 2020. Of those, 378% were rabbit attacks, 67 were considered predatory attacks, and 42 were provoked/defensive attacks. In Turkey, which is where the case report, which is where the patient of the case report where this occurred, where there were 12 fatal attacks, 75% were caused by rabid wolves. The fatal attacks in North America occurred in Canada in 2005, and the last one was in Alaska in 2010. I think it was 75 miles southwest of Kodiak. It's a jogger in her 30s. That was actually the first wolf attack. I don't know why I remember this. That was the first wolf attack, I think. Don't quote me on this. The first wolf attack in Alaska where they actually used, they sampled DNA to confirm that it was a wolf attack. There were tracks, but they actually did DNA testing. And I guess it was the first time that ever happened. In any case, in the 2005 attack, it was a 22-year-old male that was killed near a remote mining camp. And the camp had an open garbage dump that was frequented by wolves that showed no fear of humans. I just figured I'd throw that sample in. Okay. Anyway, so this I outsourced from Western Wildlife Outreach, which is a non-for-profit out of Olympia, Washington. They didn't really in the case report talk about what you're kind of supposed to do when you encounter wolves. It delved more into the discussion on rabies, which I will. So just listed on the site, to prevent wolves from being habituated, people should resist the temptation to approach wolves, not entice or allow wolves to come near them, not feed wolves or leave food outdoors, including pet food, not approach fresh wolf kills, dens, or sites, and not allow wolves to become comfortable near human inhabited areas. Notify authorities about wolves that seem comfortable around people, seek human food or frequent human or livestock areas. Early interventions can keep problems like this from getting worse if they're happening. And then during a close encounter with a wolf, people should do the following. Stand tall and make themselves look larger, and then calmly but slowly back away and maintain eye contact. And they said if the wolf does not run away immediately, continue making yourself large, keeping eye contact and backing away, not turning your back on the wolf or running away from the wolf. And if you have a dog and the dog's about to encounter the wolf, the dog should be brought to heel at the owner's side as quickly as possible and leashed. Standing between the dog and the wolf often ends the encounter. To avoid risk of injury to yourself, don't attempt to break up a physical fight between a wolf and a dog, except by using bear spray or a powerful hose from a safe distance. If the wolf does not retreat and is acting aggressive by holding its tail high, raising its hackles, barking, or howling, you should yell and throw things at it while continuing to back away. And then if it attacks, fight back aggressively to show you are too dangerous to attack. And to ensure that there is no opportunity for your child or your pet, if they're with you, to encounter any carnivore while camping, do not allow children to play away from camp or alone. Keep them close to adults at all times. Keep pets leashed and under control as well. Just wanted to hit on that before we kind of get into the case report here, as well as rabies. So just a quick introduction to this. It represents one of the most feared potential complications from animal bites. It's got the highest case fatality rate of any human infectious disease, actually. So rabies and rabies-like illnesses are caused by different variants and species of neurotropic viruses in the Rhabdoviridae family. I just took step one, so this is why I know this. Lyssaviruses is the genus of rabies, and it has a predilection for neural tissue, and it spreads via peripheral nerves to the CNS. The mechanism by which rabies causes severe CNS disease, by the way, is unclear. Viruses amplify near the site of inoculation in muscle cells and subsequently enter local motor and sensory nerves. It's a zoonotic disease. It leads to fatal encephalitis in humans and other mammals. Most infections in humans originate from dogs, as I said earlier, and the WHO estimates that some 55,000 humans die of rabies every single year. A total of 247 human rabies patients were reported in Turkey between 1980 and 2006. And that's an average of 9.5 cases per year. And rabies post-exposure prophylaxis was administered to about 140,000 persons in 2006, as reported by the Turkish Ministry of Health. Again, citing Turkey here because that's relevant to the case report. Okay, anyway, let's get to that now. So we're going to do a review of the case report. A link is right here. And I'm sure you can find a link posted to this somewhere. However, this is it in case you want to pause, take a screenshot and check this out for yourself. It's a pretty crazy story. So we'll talk about it. So there's the title, of course. The case report details the story of a 60-year-old man who was attacked by a rabid wolf while working in his garden. And it details the care he received after coming to the ER and the unfortunate turn for the worse his health took that ultimately led to his demise, as the title suggests. The case report then discusses wild animal attacks in the context of the medical condition rabies. It seeks to educate about how to properly diagnose and treat rabies as an emergency physician, as well as detail how to prevent wild animal bites in the first place. And this was created by, or the first author of this case report was Suha Turkman, and published in volume 23, issue 3 of the Wilderness and Environmental Medicine Journal. The author is an emergency medicine physician. He's and a professor as well, currently working in Qatar. Per ResearchGate, he has like 955 citations, 74 publications. He's qualified to talk about this and is qualified author for the case report. It doesn't seek to change clinical practice necessarily, this case report. More so, it hopes to share an attention-grabbing anecdote about rabies, as well as re-educate about proper management of the rare but deadly illness. The author stated that he has no conflicts of interest. There doesn't appear to be any clear examples of bias to point out here, just an interesting patient encounter and a refresher about rabies and wild animal attacks, which is fitting, of course, for this month's journal club. With all that being said, this is what happened. So a 60-year-old man was attacked by a wolf while sitting in his garden, and it resulted in facial injuries, as you can see on the photo, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The patient actually managed to strangle the wolf to death. They didn't really go into detail on how he managed to do so, but I thought that was pretty interesting. I'll leave that to your imagination, I guess. Upon arrival at the ER, he was conscious, oriented, and cooperative with stable vital signs. Physical exam revealed what you see on the screen. So it was an oblique laceration of the face, approximately 5 centimeters in length, full thickness as far as the mucosa, starting from the right oral commissure and extending laterally and with irregular edges. There was a 0.5 centimeter vermilion defect at the right lateral commissure and a 1 centimeter skin cut at the left lateral commissure. The facial artery was exposed and thrombosed proximally. The patient received tetanus vaccine, tetanus IG, and rabies vaccine, and IG as well, immunoglobulin. The lacs were irrigated and sutured, and oral antibiotics were prescribed. The patient was discharged and received additional vaccinations on days 3 and 7 after discharge. However, on day 25, he returned to the ER with symptoms of blurred consciousness, increased salivation, and respiratory difficulty. And despite medical intervention, including ET tube intubation, the patient experienced cardiac arrest and was diagnosed with rabies through autopsy and brain biopsy. Okay, so rabies-related emergency department visits are commonly caused by dog bites, especially in developing countries. These injuries can lead to local wound infections and systemic complications like meningitis, local abscess, septic arthritis, tenosynovitis, and osteomyelitis or endocarditis. Meningitis, brain abscess, or sepsis with disseminated intravascular coagulation, DIC. Rabies is a fatal disease with most deaths occurring in Asia and Africa and other developing countries due to limited animal control and vaccination programs. In developed countries, rabies is mainly found in wild animals like raccoons, foxes, skunks, and bats. The incubation period in humans varies, but it's typically about 1 to 2 months, but with shorter periods if the bite is on the head or neck. The patient in this report was injured, of course, in the facial region, and in spite of post-exposure prophylaxis, rabies symptoms appeared some 26 days later. In this case, post-exposure prophylaxis likely did not work just because of the location of the wound, how it was on his face. I thought I had notes on these slides right here. I actually do. Okay, so anyway, so what you're seeing on the screen right here, these very cool slides. I'm familiar with again because I just passed up one recently. So it's Negri bodies. So if you look on the left, where I'm pointing, they're eosinophilic intracytoplasmic inclusion bodies present within the cell bodies and axons of neurons infected by the rabies virus. Although the presence of Negri bodies, by the way, is pathognomonic for rabies, their absence also does not rule out infection. So you just have to, of course, keep that in mind. In the middle, this is a photomicrograph of brain tissue, an H&E stain with high magnification. So it's a pyramidal cell that's visible in the center of the image, which I don't think I included. Yeah, there we go. Hold on 1 second. Negri bodies are most commonly found within pyramidal cells of the hippocampus and the Purkinje cells of patients infected by rabies virus. And again, it's pathognomonic, but it does not rule it out if you don't see it as well. And then this is just a electromicrograph on the right side of the screen. You can see just the bullet-shaped, which is characteristic, the bullet-shaped rabies viridae. I think maybe like right here, they're bullet-shaped. That's like a very, very high yield, for lack of better words, description of what they look like on that sort of imaging. Okay, so symptoms of rabies attacks. So getting back to rabies now. So symptoms of rabies includes depression, fever, lack of appetite, and sensory changes, followed by acute neurological phases characterized by restlessness, hallucinations, autonomic disability, and hydrophobia as well. And so let's go a little bit deeper on that. So after the initial prodromal phase, the patient's going to develop an acute neurologic phase. The acute neurologic phase has 2 forms, a furious and a paralytic form. The furious form is the most commonly seen presentation. Think here hyperactivity, disorientation, hallucinations, bizarre behavior, and autonomic dysfunction occurring. Confusion, lethargy, and increased salivary gland secretion appears within a few days. The patient, if they attempt to drink fluids, will that process is going to result in severe spasms in the pharynx, the larynx, and the diaphragm. In this case, that's what's known as hydrophobia in this case. Half of patients may have that hydrophobia, and the paralytic rabies form is noted in about 20% of patients. Paralysis will be symmetric and it will be diffuse. Fever and nuchal rigidity may accompany the paralytic form. And rabies remains a global threat despite pet vaccination efforts. So post-exposure prophylaxis should be considered for victims of unprovoked dog and cat bites, just to make sure. Antibiotic prophylaxis and tetanus immunization are also crucial in these patients. This prophylactic antibiotic regimen should cover Staph aureus streptococci, Haemophilus species anaerobes, and Pasteurella multicida, especially when we're talking canine and feline bites, as well as Eikenella corrodens, if we're talking about human bites. So we covered the images, of course. And this was just off of Ambus. I thought it was kind of a cool chart to go through when you have potential rabies exposure, depending on the specific animal, certain tests and whether so or not to lead to post-exposure prophylaxis. Then, of course, an important note is that rabies is one of those diseases that you would then want to contact the local health department and the CDC as well, because it is one of those reportable ones. Okay, so in conclusion, wild animal attacks are rare, especially this poor 60-year-old man's situation. That's a very rare situation to find yourself in. But when they occur, accurate wound cleaning, rabies and tetanus prophylaxis, and antibiotic treatment is absolutely essential. Preventative measures include pet vaccination, especially dogs, cats, and ferrets, avoid contact with wild animals, and keeping bats out of living spaces as well. And as emergency medicine, wilderness emergency medicine physicians caring for patients of unexpected wild animal attacks you must absolutely in this process consider the possibility of the animal that is involved in an attack being rabid, and take the appropriate steps and preventative strategies necessary to manage those patients. That's all I got on wolf attacks. Please let me know if you have any questions whatsoever.
Yeah, great job. That was luckily something that I've never had to encounter, is a wolf just coming to get me in my garden. But it is something that is unfortunately very much present in Southwest Virginia. Can somebody explain how you administer the immunoglobulin and the vaccine to a patient with need for prophylaxis against rabies? What do you do? Any residents who have had to do it?
Yeah, I'll jump in there.
Go for
So
it.
you had to do it a couple times now down in South Carolina. We've got the vaccine itself. You put it in the opposite limb to where the injury is. You'll administer the immunoglobulin into the wound as much as you possibly can, and then when they come back, you repeat those on the following doses. I actually had one. It was kind of interesting. I had to immunize a gentleman who came in after his goat was diagnosed with rabies by the state health agency. It went rabid. He had to lock it up, and then it died the next day, and they autopsied it and had rabies. So. Odd.
Do you remember which days for the series for the vaccine?
I thought it was like 3/7/14.
Mhm.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, 03714. They used to do a 28, but that was stopped sometime within the past 5 years. So there's also the argument that if you can capture the animal and observe it for 10 days, if it's unvaccinated, and you want to do an observation period, but it is frustrating to start the schedule. Like, I mean, there's 03740, 4 visits to get the vaccine series completed. So it's somewhat frustrating for a patient to have to do, but there's like, what is it? Maybe 1 or 2 survivals ever once a patient becomes symptomatic. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, if I have an encounter, unless it's like a family or a friend's animal, like a pet, I just strongly recommend, you can't force somebody to get this shot, but I strongly recommend that they get vaccinated and get the immunoglobulin. Where I live in my neighborhood, there's been 2 confirmed positive foxes with rabies within the past 2 years. And then just for this past month, there was a fox positive rabies in the parking lot of a local mall, which goes to show that, and rabies makes them act differently. So if you see a nocturnal animal out during the day, if you see an animal acting abnormally or like not afraid of you, then that is concerning. Vaccinating the opposite limb, I'm honestly not sure. Is Mike still here?
Yeah,
Mike.
so from what I had read, it was that you don't want the immunoglobulin to interact with the vaccine. I don't know. I've never actually looked into that as far as like whether it's data driven or just a thing that we, theorized, but
I'm not sure if there's much data behind it, but the most important thing that you mentioned out of that is that you inject the immunoglobulin into and around the wound. That's tough when you have, a patient who's in a room with a bat while they were sleeping, because there's no wound. You just have to assume there was a bite because the risk of missing a bite is too high. So you just inject it into the deltoid. Concerningly, I won't say which hospital I was working at because I've done some local locums and moonlighting work, but I was working at a hospital where they did not know that the immunoglobulin had to be injected into the wound. So they were just injecting it just into the deltoid every time. So we might think this is common knowledge. We might think that this is just straight from a board exam or Roche review, but there are facilities who are unsure of how to do it. So if you will know it, you might be able to fix a procedure. So hopefully this helps somebody in the future. I recommend that if you're in a high risk area, if there's reports in the past 5-10 years of a rabid animal, I would just administer the immunoglobulin and the vaccine. Even if the animal is being able to be observed for those 10 days, a couple doses in the meantime won't hurt the patient. It might save them. So I would just recommend doing it. It's just not worth missing it, because
I have a question about
Yeah.
like you're mentioning, like it says, like I think in Titnally's and in Rosen's too, you can have that quarantine of the animal to like watch it for 10 days. Would your like recommendation to give like prophylaxis change depending on like where the bite occurred? Because I know like this patient that we just saw, the bite occurred on the face, and that's more risky than like, a foot or like an extremity bite.
Yeah, that also gets really hard with the patients who were just like at a camp and a bat flew into their cabin and they woke up and found the bat. That gets hard to convince a patient to get the series, because they're like, hey, I was just sleeping. Like, that's really hard to convince them. If there's a bite proximal to the trunk, to the neck, to the face, to the torso itself, I would more strongly advise that they receive the series rather than like I suppose, distal portion of the extremities. In general, though, I just happen to practice in an area where there is known rabies and there is known Lyme disease, there is known alpha gal, so I just treat everything. I just happen to live in an area where we actually get to practice wilderness medicine, which is kind of cool. So I'm honestly just a bit of I guess I'm more conservative in that regard. Everybody can practice their own way, but it's one of those things that's just not worth missing. Like, I'm more worried about somebody getting rabies than I am like somebody getting a needle stick and getting Hep C or HIV. So there were some other cases and some other animals that I wanted to include. Alligators, I thought about adding them because so many of us work and have experienced Everglades or South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida. I just chose the big three: cougars, bears, wolves. Thank you very much for presenting. We covered rabies, we covered cougar and bear prevention and what to do in encounters. Anybody have any other large animal attacks they'd like to mention? I think Sarah had said there was it a shark recently that you heard of a case, Sarah?
Oh, yeah, we've had a couple of bull shark attacks here that have resulted in limb loss.
Yeah. I didn't want to get too deep into sharks because we did that in April. Julia here presented back in April. I did, so I'm kind of like the poster child for just diving deeper and deeper into the WMS, but I finished my diploma in mountain medicine. I finished my fellowship, my FOM, currently working on my diploma in dive medicine. So the one component of that was the diving in the marine medicine conference out in San Diego. So we had to do some kayaking out there, and they were talking about a case. It was a 14-foot great white is not the name anymore. It's just white shark attack on a adult male within the past 10 years. Came up, if he was swimming, not surfing, came up from beneath him, got his legs, and essentially completely transected both femoral arteries, and he bled out before he even got halfway to shore. And then that day I went scuba diving like at that beach. So yeah, risk versus statistics, I suppose, but just be prepared, and then you'll know what to do in a case like this. As far as animal attacks goes, I think I'm going to stop recording unless anybody has anything else to mention.
No, with one of the bull sharks, her brother is a firefighter paramedic, and he jumped into the water, beat the shark off of her, and had a tourniquet in his bag, and was able to apply a tourniquet, which absolutely saved her life.
I don't have any cooler stories than that, unfortunately, but that does is another tangent. Go to show statistically, the one thing you can carry with you day-to-day basis to improve loss of life, I suppose morbidity as well, is a tourniquet. More and more mass shootings, more and more drive-bys, more and more shark encounters. Quite a few studies have shown that if there was at least one person on hand with these mass shootings with a bystander with a tourniquet, there would have been at minimum one person with could have been saved at each of these shootings. So teach people how to use tourniquets, teach the stop to bleed course, and just learn as much as you can. Other than that, I'm happy to talk about FOM, DIM, wilderness medicine stuff. But otherwise, as far as this topic goes, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks for joining, everybody. The next month, like I said, is backpacking medicine, and our fellow Janice is going to be joining me for that session. I will see you next month. And let's see, where is the recording?
Thank you for hosting.